Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. So this is our September RIPSI Research and Immunology Professional Community Town Hall. We have 2 of these a year. So thank you for being here. This will be recorded and posted online. So if you have anything you'd like to watch again, bloopers, for example, please see them there. So our agenda today, welcome. We'll introduce our RIPSI representatives, go over last year's accomplishments, review some symposium proposals that were put forward, talk about some standards and guidelines committee documents, and then also review that process for next year as well. And then we have an upcoming webinar. We'll discuss some of our preliminary programming ideas. And then we have some other announcements in business we'll be reviewing as well. And then at any time, this is a town hall meeting, so I would encourage you to interrupt and ask questions. So these are your RIPSI representatives. So I am chairing this year. Daniel Calabrese from UCSF. Mark Simon is our representative to PVD. Mary Amanda Dew is the representative to the Heart Failure IDN Forum. Kamdar is our representative to the Early Career and Training Committee. Phyllis Billia represents MCS. Adriana Zevi is representative from Leadership Advisory Forum. Apologies to some of the folks here because I stole these pictures from the internet. And then Christine Falk was part of our committee until around April when she rotated off for other commitments. So if you are part of these IDNs and you have questions, certainly reach out to me, but also each of these representatives should be your point of contact with questions. So over the last year, we were quite busy as a professional community. At our last conference, we had 29 co-sponsored symposium proposals that covered a range of topics from new technologies, omics. There was a mitochondrial symposium session, some cellular interactions, new diagnostics and therapeutics. So our members were busy. We reviewed some OPTN comments. We co-sponsored an International Transplant Congress session, happened on May 3rd. This is titled New Perspectives in Innate ILC Immunity and Tissue-Resident Leukocytes. And I believe Stephen Jude gave that talk to a large audience. Last year, we sponsored a webinar, Sequencing the Future, Next Generation Sequencing and Transplant Diagnostics, also quite successful, also available on YouTube if anyone would like to check that out. And then we put forward a few consensus statements that are still being worked on. One was on surrogate endpoints in clinical trials, and the other one was on biomarkers. So those are still active. And so we had some proposal ideas. We had a May 16th symposium development call. I'm not sure where these sessions are now, but we had some fruitful conversations about the future of lung transplant, namely clinical research methodologies. There was a session being developed on novel technologies in thoracic transplant and research diagnostics. Some HLA plus, so epitopes and antibody science was put forward. And then there was a session about acute lung allograft dysfunction. And so I'm not sure where these were, but I certainly saw some come across our IDN. Overall, across our society, there were 194 symposium proposals submitted this year, which is, I think, the most to date. The fall are now with the programming committee, and we should hear back in the late fall about which will be accepted. Just a reminder to everyone here that abstract submissions are now open. This is through October 17th for your science. And I would encourage you all to apply. Any questions with any of that so far? So lately, the S&G, the Standardism Guidelines Committee, has performed a very rigorous needs assessment. In June, it was step 4 of a multi-step process was to solicit professional community leadership to create lists of practice areas where there aren't any standards and guideline documents or those that might need refreshing. And then over August, those proposals were reviewed by standards and guidelines. And then now September, we're going to get some of those proposals back. And in October, applications will be finalized for approved projects. We didn't put forward a lot, though. RIPSI, there were a lot of co-sponsored projects. The one proposal that came across our lung IDN that was RIPSI relevant was an ISHLT consensus document on acute lung allograft dysfunction. And so this was intended because lung transplant recipients have many episodes of clinical deterioration over a short period of time. And the purpose was to establish a consensus definition for this acute lung allograft dysfunction and to seek to propose guidelines for clinicians and also researchers so that when we're investigating this, we can have a shared definition and a shared risk period. So that was forwarded on to the Standardization Guideline Committee, and they are reviewing it now. So more to come. If this is of interest, I'm happy to, you can email me or message me through ISHLT Connect. I'm happy to forward you to the person that drafted the consensus guideline, though most of the people that will be involved are still being determined. So again, I don't want everyone to feel like they were left out of the standards and guideline document creation or process. They can be submitted at any time of the year. So if there are any thoughts about what might be particularly important for our research community, we can work on them as a professional community and submit them together at any time. So I think this would be a good time to pause and ask if there were any thoughts about future standards and guidelines documents that are needed, particularly as it relates to research in immunology.
Can I ask a question, Danny? I know Teresa and many others did all the work on the BAL standardization.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a similar document on PBMCs or peripheral blood sample storage? I feel like our community has come a long way. There's lots of multi-center consortia and different individual transplant centers collecting lots of biospecimens. And I wonder if we need to be thinking about whether cells are being stored in the same way, whether DNA or RNA is being stored similarly.
To my knowledge, that has not been addressed, though. I know Teresa and John have been around a little longer than me. I think that's a really interesting idea because to expand upon PBMCs, there's people like you, I know, Kira, that are doing lung biopsies before and after reperfusion. And so how we're handling those, what size samples they are, how we're getting to single cells. I think that's important to standardize. So I'd be interested in what others have to say.
I think it's really good idea because I was just having a conversation with Sean about this yesterday, and like their group at NIH has actually put in a huge amount of work in studying these questions, so that there's data to inform guidelines if we ask the right people. So I would support this as a plan. And on the PBMC side, we've put some efforts into learning what does and doesn't work. So I think there's probably a lot of knowledge that could be shared.
To piggyback on some other efforts that are ongoing, I know the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation has a lung transplant consortium, and that certainly some of their conversations have been about how to optimize and uniformly collect samples across multiple centers. And then also the NIH has their lung transplant efforts now. So I'm wondering, similar to if this might be like a co-sponsored document, if this is going to be put forward with some of these other groups, CFF and even NHLBI.
I think.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I'll just comment. I think that's a great idea. I'll just sort of mention that the BAL was a little different because it was really focused on it was like a clinical need, and the biobanking part of it was really only one of the sections of the document. So that would be a little more similar as if you were doing, I don't know, like transbronchial biopsy collection or something along those lines. But I think there's a lot of space or need for the biobanking stuff specifically. The blood collection and storage, I haven't heard that come up much. I think that'd be great. And that could actually be done across, the different IDNs within ISHLT, which would be nice, or it could be focused on lung transplant. Maybe there's benefit to that as well. There has been mention of something like explanted lung tissue and how to store that and how to biobank that, EVLP samples. A few people have thought about it. I just think they haven't wanted to embark on leading it. So I think if there is a prospective leader for any of this, I think that'd be great.
One thing about peripheral blood is that it touches on non-lung samples. So I don't know if we'd want to involve cardiology or if that would be like a joint statement with ATS or.
Mark raised his hand. I would love your input.
So I think this is a fantastic idea. I think this is going to be driven by the research community because this is not standardized into clinical practice, but it sits very nicely within this professional community. I think you should reach out across all the domains because what we're looking at here is to have a standardized collection with a clinical data set, which may be defined later, that then allows multi-center studies to be done by utilizing that resource that's available. And standardization of collection is a fantastic way to go forward with that. It probably shouldn't be too difficult. I mean, most techniques within the molecular sphere are fairly standardized already, but I think it's quite an interesting one to do. I think I would commend that.
I mean, I just think it's something any center that starts keeping samples struggles with. And if you have people around you that already do this, it's very straightforward and easy. But if you don't, there's a lot of questions about, and what you Google on the internet does not tell you the whole story. So it just might be something before we get too far into multi-center biobanks of thousands of patient samples. It just was something I was thinking about. Our center is part of the NIH Lung Transplant Consortium, and I know this has come up a lot about what do you collect, how do you collect it, who's paying for it, where is it getting stored, all those types of questions, which are sort of secondary to what do you actually have to store, for what purposes.
I agree. I think the what and how are the questions you should be answering. The rest of those are politics.
I saw Teresa's hand up first.
Yes, I'll just re-emphasize the concept that you already brought up, which is a bunch of people are already working on this within different consortia. So involving those people will be really helpful. I think you've got that in your mind already.
And Adriana.
So, very interestingly, today I was in another Zoom meeting, and it happened to be the small bowel consortium and research, and the same question comes up. So it's really appropriate to all organs when you want to do research. One has to remember when you store sample that you have to have, to what type of assay you're thinking in the future to store, if it's a antibody or if it is serum or plasma or single cell and so forth. And for each one is a condition. But second, we have an IRB that I can store clinical samples after they are used. So that's also important because they cannot just take samples and put them away, and then they have to be de-identified and IRBs and so forth. So in order to do that, you have to have the ability, and in US, it's very important to have the right IRB to be able to store the samples so they can be used single or multi-center and so forth. So I think that's something important for the community also to understand and implement.
Yeah.
Well, what an interesting idea. Kira, you're the one that came up with it. So I know you're on some other consensus documents currently, so you're fully aware of the work involved. I'm happy to help, and so the rest of the RIPSI representatives kind of shepherd this through. So maybe we can talk offline if you're interested in championing this.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, I think because this is something that crosses different existing groups, that it may make sense to see if we can get stakeholders from each area. to commit to working together. But I think a further discussion offline and really solicitation of interest. You know, like I know in the past we've done, are you really super interested? Are you kind of interested? Or will you answer some questions? Kind of a tiered volunteer system, maybe something that we could start with to at least find out who feels like they have important contributions to the question.
Martin.
No, I think actually the society's IDN structure actually lends itself to this, because you can pull people in from each of the 4 big IDNs to support this, whether it be your own IDN representatives or another, doesn't matter. But I think that's the way you'll get this sort of, you know, cross-representational structure in place. So I'd look out to your leads into each IDN as a way of identifying people to engage.
That's a good suggestion. And then I, like Teresa said, there are some consortiums that have already been tackling this problem with certain samples, so we should perhaps have those folks on the committee too. Well, very interesting. Any other thoughts on future SMG documents? So much like last year, we had a webinar called Sequencing the Future. This year, our planned webinar is on November 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. There will be many announcements in the future. Preliminarily, we're thinking of having the webinar focus on bench to bedside. So really kind of big picture of translation of research in thoracic transplant, looking at really the science of cell-free DNA and how it kind of came to the bedside. Then talking about the big picture of cystic fibrosis and how that organization pushed forward receptor modulation and how that's changing the dynamics and population of our lung transplant now. And then reviewing key innovations from more of a basic perspective in heart and MCS. And then also key innovations on the horizon in lung as well. So this is the kind of backbone, a skeleton of what we're thinking of. Obviously, we haven't selected speakers yet, but input from our community is welcome.
Danny, is that a 1 or 2 hour thing?
This is a 1 hour, so these would be 12-minute talks with another 12 minutes of discussion. So it is a little compressed.
Is the idea like talking about the methodology of translation or the like specific topics? Because there's a lot here.
I think the idea was to have 2 kind of big talks about this is a complete research from the bench to the bedside, cell-free DNA and CFF as a treatment, and then looking at kind of in snippets what's coming, kind of what's exciting, what's ready to be translated or near that. Something a little different that we wouldn't necessarily do during our annual conference because it's a little broader. Some of the criticism I've heard is that people are a little cell-free DNA'd out, to use a new word. So that certainly.
What is meant by innovations?
Well, thinking of new diagnostics or new kind of interventions on the horizon.
Yeah, because it might
They're
depend.
going to, if you're going to discuss the impact of CF receptors, it might be something to think about discussing lung transplant for ARDS, particularly in the setting of COVID, because the success with COVID lung transplants has increased interest in transplanting patients with other types of ARDS off of ECMO.
I think that's an interesting idea. For the fourth talk, especially, we can try and package that in. It's definitely a new category that we weren't transplanting before, so it's always of interest.
Well, one thought we could think about, and the CF receptor made me think about this, is you have use of these tools, like something like CF receptor modulation before transplant, but then all the questions about what do you do after transplant. And that comes up with, CF modulation, alpha-1 replacement, other immunotherapies for autoimmune conditions. So, that may be a different way to think about it. I mean, cell-free DNA is really just a after transplant thing for our patients, but I wonder if thinking about pre-post may broaden it to being conceptually interesting to both heart and lung participants.
I like these ideas. I would just say to make sure we sort of keep it research focused. Some of the topics can also be incorporated into clinical, and into some of the clinical webinars.
Yeah, so the CF talk specifically was about the science, how I know there's a new screening assay developed that enabled kind of rapid throughput of modulation of receptors, and like really focusing on that, and then maybe just talking about in translation briefly how it has altered the landscape of what we're transplanting now, like showing the impact. So it's meant to be a big picture, more on the basic science though.
Yeah, I like the bench to bedside focus, and then within that there are a lot of different options. I agree.
These are helpful. Any other thoughts? And we don't know what's going to be programmed next year. So again, this had to be a topic that wasn't necessarily put forward. Martin.
I was going to say, don't lose sight of what you put into your symposium proposals for this year, even if they don't get in, because that's the seed for corn, if you like, for future webinars or even next year's symposia for the following year's meeting. The ideas people have worked on and put together, may not cross the bar, they may need a bit of tweaking, but they're clearly things that are important and relevant. So don't lose sight of them.
I think that's a really good point, Martin. I have seen people sort of put together these symposia proposals. They don't get accepted and they get sort of discouraged, but next year is probably a good year to resubmit it.
Well, there's next year's resubmissions, but I think also the webinars are great opportunities to present these things, and you get a feel of about what the interest is in these topics, and that may then inform a further symposium proposal. So I think the whole thing is a virtuous cycle, and a lot of people do a lot of work at putting those together, and I really think we shouldn't lose them.
I agree. That was really helpful for us last year, and I think sometimes there's great topics that are better discussed without some of the constraints of the annual meeting structure. Sometimes you just need one person to be able to talk for longer, or divide things up in different ways.
And in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way, sometimes you have to realize that other people are not as well informed or interested as you are.
We certainly scavenged last year's symposium proposals that didn't make it to the annual meeting for some of this too.
Yeah, but I think that the sort of virtuous cycle of just keeping an eye on those things is something that the professional communities can be really good at.
One of the things that we learned from the last year is that you really need to give some time for discussion. And if you have short presentation and no discussion, it just goes on. And again, the involvement of the participants and the ability to ask questions and discuss. Maybe you can do that more in the webinar than you do that in the regular structured meeting. And having sometimes 4 12 minutes presentation doesn't allow that. So it all depends what you want to cover, how much interest from the, and if you have a good moderator can really bring up more aspects of the presentation and interest.
Well, thank you everyone for their thoughts. So moving forward, one of the members proposed something for your consideration. So the I in RIPSI is immunology. And then per our charter, we're allowed as a professional community to really govern ourselves. And while we usually have an immunologist or two within our RIPSI leadership, so Adriana, looking at you now, there is no guaranteed way to have an immunologist on our committee, though this is their only, I'd say, access point to the society, because not all immunologists fit neatly within an IDN. So it had been posed to me, and I'm asking for input from our professional community on thoughts of adding an additional RIPSI leadership position that would be an immunologist alone, just to ensure that that group's represented, well represented.
This may be a strange question, but is there a definition of an immunologist? So like, would this require somebody to have a degree in immunology? Would it be a job title? Because I think there are a lot of people who would potentially call themselves immunologists that study immunology, but don't have an official.
I think the idea was not so much like a card carrying immunologist, because like you hand out those cards at AAI pretty easily, but this was like to get a clinical immunologist who has expertise in like HLA typing and DSA measurement. It's not like, because the are really that part of that's like a part of ISHLT that's otherwise not represented.
Someone that runs an HLA lab or is involved in HLA clinical work.
We discovered this at the last ISHLT meeting when we had the RIPSI session. There were a number of clinical immunologists who showed up there, and they didn't really know what was the way that they would get involved.
I think this is a great idea, Danny. I mean, it is, obviously we've all benefit from Dr. Zeevy's input over the years for sure, but having an HLA or other antibody immunology person consistently represented, I think is a great idea. And exactly what it's called or what pool of people they come from, we can figure out, but this is a great idea.
I think you can call it very simple. It's the histocompatibility group that represents that discipline. And kind of that involves also DNA typing, matching, antibody, HLA, non-HLA. And it really involves, even outside, because you're involved in many different aspects of immunology. But the core is some understanding of histocompatibility, all aspects.
Martin, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There are people in the community that they come to the meeting and they share their experience every single time, and I think they need to find a place or a representation.
Yeah, so Greg will correct me if I get any of this wrong. Thank you, Greg.
Indeed.
But I think in principle, the idea is to be inclusive and to make the professional communities as open as possible to everybody. I think if you don't have a clinical immunologist as a representative on IDN and therefore an automatic member of your steering group, then consideration to having one on that group is a matter for the professional community to decide, not down to us to dictate to. My word of caution is that how many other minority groups do you want to include? Because otherwise you could end up with a very difficult group to do. So I think in principle, yes, I think this is a great idea. I think we want to be open, inclusive, as widely representative as possible, but don't make it too narrow so that you end up with 8 minority interest groups, and it gets to be a bit of a bun fight. But in principle, I think this is the thing we need to do. People like Adriana have contributed so much to our understanding over the years, and I'm sorry to sing you out, Adriana, but you know, it is without, if you don't have these people there, we are not the rich society we are.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually have a question. So would it be sort of a mandated position? Like what if there are, or are there enough HLA people to hold this position for the next many years, or will we run out of them in the next few years and then they'll be tired of us or of the position?
When you advertise that you have that opportunity, you will be surprised how many young people that would like to participate in the society, and they would be very happy to volunteer. You know, when we had a working group, I was inviting some younger people that are not as known and made them to become a member of the society in order to be part of the writing group, like for the AMR in lung and so forth. So I think this is a new, it's a good initiative to again bring these people in the fold and make them participate in the meeting, and as well as some kind of functions. So I think there is a good cadre out there, but they don't know, and not everybody. You know, I was sold for ICHLT from the time it started. I think 1987 was my first meeting. So it's a long standing. But there are people out there that you know, would like.
I agree with Adriana. I think if we can encourage people to feel they have a home in the society and have a voice in the society, then they will be part of the society.
Absolutely. And it's a very rich area of collaboration and multiple, you know, clinical trials and all. We are part of it. So this will be, I think, a good, however you want to put it, it doesn't have to be a voting, non-voting. You know, I'm not looking into the specifics, but if you can embrace and enhance that visibility, that this is a good thing to come to the society because you have a voice, it's great.
That sounds great. It's a great argument to increase the sort of the recruitment of this group of people. That's a really good point.
Well, thank you for the lively discussion. It sounds like most here are in favor, so I'll work behind the scenes with the rest of the RIPSI leadership to move this forward.
Could you keep staff in the loop about your decisions on this, please? So that Greg et al. Are cited on it, please.
Of course.
Thank you.
And then I just have a couple of announcements. That was most of the RIPSI business. So if there are any other topics of concern, we have some time to discuss them. So I have 2 more slides. So just announcing the launch of JHLT Open. I'm sure you all have received the emails and ICHLT Connect messaging. Again, it's a new open journal, a cousin to our JHLT publication. Over the next rest of 2023, all publishing fees are waived and for members and discounted steeply in 2024. And then if anyone has any ideas from our RIPSI community of themed issues, please reach out to us. I think this is a good opportunity for us to popularize some research that might not have been easily submitted elsewhere, or to make a collection that would be of interest to our members. Then there are some new research grants, and the deadline to apply is at the end of this month. So please reach out to people that you know might be interested in multimodality research in heart transplant, non-invasive biomarkers in lung transplant, or spirometry in lung transplant, and CLAD. That is all I have. So are there other questions from our community? Well, feel free to message me or your other representatives if there are other questions or concerns. For those of you watching this on YouTube, if you'd like to participate in the conversation, you can start in a discussion in ICHLT Connect or message me directly, and I'm happy to loop you in. So thank you everyone for being here, your time and your thoughts. I think we have some exciting initiatives to follow up on.
Great stuff. Thank you all. Thank you, Danny.
And my thanks to all of you for allowing me to join your community meeting. I really appreciate that. Thank you.